Okay, I'm going to let people into from the waiting room.
All right.
And are you guys set to go if I start the introduction?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to let people from the waiting room.
All right.
And are you guys set to go if I start the introduction?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to Starting Conversations. I'm your host, Ken Watt, for the New Mexico Humanities Council. And thanks for joining us again on another lovely Wednesday afternoon. Tonight, our guest is the extraordinary musician, Johanna Darsee, and she is going to be playing and sharing with us medieval and traditional Scandinavian ballads. As always, if you're listening and joining us in the Zoom room, please mute your phones and know that you can share a chat with us if you have a comment, and you can raise your hand using the reaction buttons. Johanna will present for approximately 35 minutes, and we'll be able to take some comments and questions after that. Once again, thanks for joining us. And without further ado, Johanna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Hello, everybody. So, I'm going to talk about medieval and traditional ballads and other narrative singing traditions. So, after the presentation, you'll be free to ask questions. Now, of course, now we're here on Zoom with all the bells and whistles, but there was a time, a long time ago, before we had Zoom and YouTube and video and sound recording, even books and written language, when the only way to convey a story was by word of mouth. And if you wanted your story to spread far and wide and maybe even go further through the generations, somebody had to learn it by heart, and it had to be transmitted by oral tradition. Now, if you put a little bit of a beat and a melody to a story, it makes it a little easier to memorize. So actually, many stories that have been handed down to us until today, that's what happened today. They became songs, often very, very long songs. And kind of Stone Age database, you could call it. I thought I would start this program with a story and song from a narrative singing tradition. It's not really a medieval ballad, it's another tradition that you can find in Finland, and they're around. These are stories that were handed down through songs for many, many generations, and eventually they were also noted down, mainly by a young man in the 19th century. His name was Elias Lönnrot, and he walked from village to village and noted down his songs. And this story I'm going to sing and tell is about the first singer of stories ever, and how he invented the first musical instrument ever. And to help me, I'm going to use a very old-fashioned instrument. This here is a tagelharpa, that's the Swedish name for it, which means a horsehair harp. A more technical name for it is a bowed lyre, a lyre that you play with a bow. And this instrument, in different shapes and forms and with different number of strings, can be found all over Scandinavia and Finland and Estonia and the Shetland Islands. At one point, probably, it was popular all through Europe and beyond, until more modern instruments became readily available. So, as I mentioned, it's called a horsehair harp. So the strings are made of horsehair, which makes it a little hard to keep in tune because horsehair, like any hair, reacts to humidity and temperature. So we'll see how it goes. Once there was an old man. Now he was very, very old. He was so old that in fact his mother was the air itself who once dove down into the ocean and became pregnant. On top of that, he didn't want to come out. He stayed in his mother's belly year after year and became older and older and wiser. He was 700 years old when he finally was born. His name was Väinämöinen. Tuopase viisas Väinämöinille, ohevusen teet suvikunnan kuunte, toikeotti pojakset pollalle, jäti tuolla mättää. One day, the old Väinämöinen was taking a walk through the woods, minding his own business, when suddenly he heard somebody cry. Oh, he thought, a maiden in distress. I will save her, and then she will fall in love with me. He ran towards the sound, and he came down to the seashore, but he couldn't see anybody there. All he could see was an old boat lying there on the beach. And that's when he realized the sound, the crying, was coming from the boat. Boat, he said, why are you crying? Mitäpä se kettusi pursi valita, Väinö punani siitä, kettusi pursi kun. Vanhatkin vesillä mieppan tervoita telloilla, tuli sitä purren juoksu maaksella kapalajan neito sijaa. Well, why wouldn't I cry, said the boat. Just look at me. Here I lie abandoned. All the other boats are out there on the sea, sailing and fishing and having a great time, and nobody has taken me out for ages. Said the old Väinämöinen. You know, you look quite rotten and you have a lot of holes. You don't look really safe to take out on the water. But don't you worry. Stay here. I'll be right back. And then he went and gathered about 50 of his closest friends. And in no time, they fixed up that boat and they slapped on a good layer of tar. And then they took it out on the water. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining and the wind filled the sails, and they were making good time over the waves until suddenly there was a big thump. And then they didn't move anymore. Ooh, we must have hit a rock. But that was no rock they were stuck on. It was a rather large fish. Excellent, said the old Väinämöinen. He drew his sword and zip, 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 zip. He cut up that fish in pieces and said, let's go back to the shore and have a barbecue. And so they did. After eating, the old Väinämöinen was looking at all those bones and he thought, well, it's a pity to let all these bones go to waste. And then he had an idea. He took the jawbone from that big fish, and then he went over to the horses and picked a few strands from their tails and made strings that he tied over that jawbone. And that is how he made the first musical instrument ever. So now you know how the first ever musical instrument was invented. So for the rest of the program, I'm going to use another old-fashioned instrument. So this here is a lyre, not a bow lyre, just a lyre. And of course, lyres have been around for a long, long time. Already the old Greeks had lyres. And we're going to jump forward in time to the Middle Ages. In southern France, in the Middle Ages, it was very popular to have these troubadours that would sing and tell long stories at the courts. They could be anything from praising whatever royalty happened to be present to scandalous romance stories to horror stories, all kinds of genres. I thought I would do a French ballad that is a bit of a horror story. So this is about a young girl who has a problem. Every night she turns into a deer, which is really problematic because her brother loves hunting day and night with his friends. So this girl, she asks her mother to please tell the brother to stop hunting, at least at night. applaudir. Suivit le jour, la nuit, blanche biche, la chasse d'après moi, les barons et les princes, et mon frère Renaud, qui est encore bien pire, et moi, frère Renaud, qui est encore bien pire. Allez, allez, ma mère, va promptement lui dire qu'il arrête ses chiens jusqu'à demain grise. Suivit le jour, la nuit, blanche biche, la chasse d'après moi, les barons et les princes. Où sont tes chiens, Renaud, et ta chasse gentille? Où sont tes chiens, Renaud, et ta chasse gentille? Ils sont dans les bois, à trop blanche biche. Ils sont dans les bois, à trop blanche biche. Suivit le jour, la nuit, blanche biche, la chasse d'après moi, les barons et les princes. Arrêtez les Renaud, arrête, je t'en prie, arrête les Renaud, arrête, je t'en prie. Trois fois les accornés, à son cornet de crible, trois fois les accornés, à son cornet de cuivre. Suivit le jour, la nuit, blanche biche, la chasse d'après moi, les barons et les princes. Suivit le jour, la nuit, blanche biche, la chasse d'après moi, les barons et les princes. Okay, those of you, if there anybody in there who is not from Albuquerque, if you hear strange noises, it's because there's just started a big deluge. It started to rain, so any strange noises is the storm. So, from the French courts, this fashion of singing ballads spread all through Europe and also reached Scandinavia, where it became a smash hit. People actually used to dance to these songs. There would be a lead dancer and singer who would sing the story, and then the others would all hold hands and form long lines and dance after him and sing along in the refrain. So I thought I would do, the next one is a Scandinavian ballad. It's from an island in the Baltic Sea, near where I also am from. I was born in Finland and in a minority who speaks Swedish. And actually many of the Swedish language ballads have survived in this particular area in oral tradition. So again, this is a bit of a scary, it's what's called a murder ballad and a ghost story. And there was this fiddler who, once walking by the water, found a pile of bones. And he had this not very good idea. He took those bones and built an instrument out of them. And he also found some strands of hair nearby that he used as strings. And the instrument was great. It sounded lovely. But when he went to play, suddenly the instrument started to play by itself, and then a disembodied voice could be heard singing, telling a terrible story about how those bones came from this poor girl who was drowned. And if there are any ballad nerds here in the audience, this is the same ballad as, the same story as the English language ballad, The Cruel Sister. Spelmannen tog hennes vitgula hår i sommarens tider, lagade på strängade ro. Muttern sprider ut sig så vida. Sommarens tider, sommarens tider, sommarens tider, sommarens tider. Första slaget han på harpan slog i sommarens tider. Bruden och brudgummen log. Uttern sprider ut sig så vida. Andra slaget han på harpan led. Sommarens tider. Bruden och brudgummen grät. Uttern sprider ut sig så vida. Sommarens tider, sommarens tider, sommarens tider, sommarens tider. Tredje slaget han på harpan klang i sommarens tider. Bänkarna darra och låtarna klang. Uttern sprider ut sig så vida. Spelman tog harpan, slog mot en sten i sommarens tider. Därav upprann en jungfrus soven, örtaren sprider ut sig så vida. Sommarens tider, sommarens tider, sommarens tider, sommarens tider. So you might wonder, is this exactly what these ballads sounded like many hundreds of years ago? We have no idea, of course. By the time they were not that popular at the castles anymore, by that time they had leaked through the castle walls into even the smallest of cabins. And it's there where they survived for hundreds of years in oral tradition. There are innumerable variants of each and every ballad. And so it might be that this was a little bit of an improvised art form where maybe the singers adapted the story to whoever was listening, maybe they borrowed a bit from a popular tune at the time. So things have changed with the ages. And of course, nowadays we use different instruments, electronics and all that to perform. If you wonder where all those other singers were coming from, I'm cheating, I'm using a looper, some recording, sound on sound. So that's where those voices come from. Well, I thought I would do a Scottish ballad. This is a very popular story in ballad form. It's about a young, pretty girl, like so many stories start with young, pretty girls and then get worse from there. This girl was called Annie, and she was very pretty, so people called her Fair Annie. But she was also poor. And then one day she met a very tall and handsome and rich knight and fell in love, and followed him and lived with him for many years in his castle. They even had 7 sons together, but he never married her. And one day he told Annie, "It's been very nice all this, Annie, all these years, but I'm sure you understand that me as a noble lord, I need to have a real noble wife. So don't worry, you and the boys, you can stay here at the castle. Just if you wouldn't mind moving to the servants' quarters. And I'm going to get myself a real bride." And so he did. And there was a big wedding. And on top of it all, Annie had to serve at the wedding. But that night, after everybody had retired to their chambers, she thought, no, she was not going to let this slide so easily. So she went and sat right outside the door where the bride and groom were sleeping. And there she sat down and sang loudly about herself and the knight. She took a harp into her hand, went to the chamber door, and nay she harped, and nay she moaned, with her salt tears falling o'er. 7 brave sons I have borne to the Lord of this house. I wish that they were 7 hares to run the castle race, and I myself a good greyhound, I'd give them all a chase. a bloody grey cat. I'd rise and worry them all. Up and spoke the newcomer bride in the chamber where she lay. There is a lady in this house, she will go mad all day. Lie still, lady, lie still and sleep away. It's nothing but an old servant who waileth so for me. Up and spoke the newcomer bride, full of jealousy. I think there's something here, my lord, you wish to hide from me. My gown is on, said the newcomer bride. My shoes are on my feet, and I will go to this lady's chamber to see what makes her weep. So as you can imagine, that story ended in a lot of tears. As I mentioned, you can find the same story in ballad form in many different places. So I thought I would end with a ballad in two variants from two different places. This is a kind of Romeo and Juliet story. It's about a young girl from a rich family who is supposed to marry somebody her parents have chosen for her, but she will have none of that because she is in love with a boy from the wrong family. So just before that wedding can take place, the two young lovers escape and ride away on their horses. But the girl's father and 7 brothers also jump up on their horses and ride after them. So I'm going to do this ballad, actually, I found in ballad form in such different places as France, England, Scotland, America, Scandinavia, India, many different places. And I'm going to do one version from Swedish-speaking Finland, but I have actually translated the lyrics so you can try and follow the story. And then a version from the United States where these ballads also came with the migrants. Listen, Lady Gyllenborg, what I say in secret. Will you come with me and ride away? Det rimmar sig sover ut i vår ungdom. Nanna-ni, nanna-ni, nanna-ni-na, ut i lönndom. Nanna-ni, nanna-ni, nanna-ni-na, det rimmar sig sover ut i vår ungdom. How can I come away with you, said she, in secret? There are so many who are watching over me. Det rimmar sig sover ut i vår ungdom. Nanna-ni, nanna-ni, nanna-ni-na, ut i lönndom. Nannani 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 na nerimma say sove di burungdum. I'm watched by my father, watched by my mother in secret. I'm watched by my sister, I'm watched by my brother. Nerimma say sove di burungdum. But Valemu he whispered on his horse so grey in secret, and together they rode away. Nerimmasay sove uti burundum. And so they rode quite far away in secret, to rest for a while in a meadow they lay. Nerimmasay sove uti burundum. Wake up there, Valemu, sleep no more in secret. I can hear my father and my brothers roar. Let him as I saw uti burundum. Nannani 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 na uti landum. Nannani 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 na let him as I saw uti burundum. Wake you up, you seven brothers, and bring your sister down, for it never shall be said that a steward's son has taken her out of town. Wake up, right away. Wake up, right away. She mounted on a milk-white steed. He rode on a pall gray. He drew his pistol down my side, and they went riding away. Wake up, right away. Wake up, right away. They had not come 3 miles out of town when he looked back again and saw her father and 7 brothers come rippling over the plain. Get you down, sweet Eleanor, he said, and hold my horse by the rein while I play a while with your father and your 7 brethren. Wake up, right away. Wake up, right stole down Wayside, and they went riding away. Wayga, ride away. Wayga, ride away. And for all I know, they're still riding on across the plains and mountains, through forest, villages and towns, through the centuries and over continents, bringing their story and song with them. So that concludes this program, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I have no idea where we are at the time. So
we are fine with the time, and
yes.
let me just begin questions by saying those were evocative, beautiful, haunting, and absolutely lovely songs. And thank you. Or as my Swedish grandmother taught me to say, tack så mycket.
Oh, my grandmother was Swedish. I didn't know that. Tack, tack.
I have a couple of questions, and I want to start, Johanna, with just asking about your own background and your own training as a musician. Did you become familiar from an early stage with these instruments, or were you trained on more conventional or traditional?
Actually, not at all. I played the flute when I was little, and I still play the flute, but as you know, but maybe not the others, Zoom doesn't accept flute music. It goes crazy for some reasons. That's why I haven't used any flutes in this program. That was my first instrument, was flute. And then I actually left music for a long time, and I was doing theater, and then I was doing dance, and I actually went to India and trained as a Bharatanatyam dancer for many years. So I was performing as an actor and dancer. I had a theater and dance company in Sweden, and I was touring with that a lot. But then I started using these ballads about 25 years ago. I had heard about them and heard them as a kid because, as I said, this tradition with ballads survived to our days in the area where I'm from. And actually, there was this lady on an island not far from where I used to spend some summers, who was a very famous ballad singer. Our family had been singing for generations, and I remember there was a big thing because the radio came and recorded her, and so I had heard, I was aware of these ballads as a kid. Then I inherited a book from my grandmother with ballads. It was this thick book with all the ballads, and I started by using some of them in some theater dance productions, just as another element. And then about 20 years ago, when I moved here, me and my husband Scott, who today has been behind the technology here, but usually plays with me, we started working on exploring these ballads, and sort of I translated a lot of them from Swedish into English, and we've been performing them all around through the Humanities Council around New Mexico and other states here in the US, and and exploring different ways of performing them. I mean, traditionally they will have like 43 verses, and it would be like one person sitting at a table singing. That doesn't fit into modern programs usually, so we have I tell part of the story, and we only do a few verses, and still working on different ways of bringing these old ballads to a modern audience and making them interesting, we hope. Oh, I can't hear.
Oh, there we are.
Your lips.
We
No,
had,
yeah.
we had another listener who was curious about the composers of the ballads, whether they, for the most part, are known, whether some are anonymous. Are there female composers of any of these ballads that you're aware of?
Well, it is an oral. They were in oral tradition for a very, very long time, so there is no real. I mean, there are of course composed ballads. There are, but these traditional ballads, we don't know who composed them. They have been transmitted in oral tradition, so we don't know.
Yeah.
Who composed them.
And as far as recordings, have you made recordings that are available of some of these?
Yes. If you're interested in hearing recordings, the easiest is actually to go to our website. I don't know if that's available somehow through Humanities Council. Otherwise, it's hongeldarsee.com or our Facebook page. And we have recorded with Scott, how many CDs? 3 CDs. And and an EP.
Uh-huh.
So yes, we have recordings and also some videos with our recordings. So obviously, usually I perform this live, so this is all new to do it like this on Zoom.
I'm curious about Finnish language. I don't speak or read Finnish, I have to confess, but I have heard that Finnish is a distinct and unusual language, having very little to do with any Indo-European language traditions that many of us might be familiar with.
Yeah, so again, I come from the small minority in Finland that speaks Swedish actually, but the main language in Finland is Finnish. And yes, that's a language that isn't really related to other European languages. It's called Finno-Ugric languages. It's very hard to learn. So, one second.
The first song is in Finnish.
Yeah, the very first song, Scott is telling me what to say here. The very first song I sang was in Finnish, but actually, a very peculiar Finnish dialect on top of it. So yes, it's a different language.
And the second one, if I'm not mistaken, was French, but was that a medieval chanson style
Well,
of French?
again, it's a traditional French ballad. So as I said, it's very hard to know if the melody was exactly that. The story you can tell is a medieval story because it's this legend about the girl that turns into a deer. The melody, we don't know again if that is exactly what it sounded like in medieval times because again, they did have pen and paper in those days, but it was very expensive. So very few things were noted down in those days. So we can only guess, but it's a traditional ballad, yeah.
And the significance of the ballad with the deer, do you know anything behind why that story was told or how that story was told in that particular way?
I think there are many like Celtic legends that include women turning into deers back and forth, and it might go back to old mythology, and then like all stories also they sort of shift shape and all that, and by medieval times it was more of a romance kind of story, but it's a very common theme actually in medieval legends that these people turning into deers back and forth, and deers having a very prominent role to play. So I think deers were like symbolic in many different ways. I'm not super familiar with Celtic mythology, but I think that's where it's from a bit.
I want to say that transformation appears in some Ibsen, some play by Ibsen. I want to say A Doll's House. I think the children come out at a Christmas celebration and have transformed
Is
into
that so? I
deer.
don't, I'm not sure.
I'm straining my own memory of
Yeah.
Ibsen's work here, but I feel like that. Yes, I feel like that's
Well,
within the
it's a common theme. I mean, transformation stories, and you find it in a lot of ballads, both into deers. You have also Scandinavian ballads about werewolves, and such, and people turning into different animals and backs. It's usually gruesome stories.
Mm,
So
mm.
that is the one thing with ballads. There are many, many ballads that you can't even perform because they're just so horrid, the stories, unless you perform them in language not nobody understands. But I think, I mean, nowadays we like to watch scary stories, on TV and all that, and it was the entertainment at the time. So there's no subjects or there are taboo in medieval ballads. It's not only cute stories, but
Right.
yeah.
I guess this would be the time to cue the ballad about murder hornets, like we talked about the other day.
Yes, the murder
Yeah.
hornets. I think there's going to be ballads about the murder hornets and other things this year.
I don't know if we have any other questions. I'm just freestyling an interview with Johanna here. So if is there anything else you'd like us to know about these traditions, or would the gentleman behind the technology like to tell us anything?
Again, so what I've been working on a lot is to dig up all these different ballads, and I love finding ballads from different places, telling the same story, and then putting them together so that I can tell the whole story with different variants. And then the arrangement you hear, again, we don't know exactly what it sounded like in medieval time. I know the traditional, like in the 60s, back, it was usually a solo, one woman singing without any accompaniment. So Scott and I have done a lot of arrangements around these ballads, so that with different instruments, and yeah, so I tend to use different instruments and also technology like the looper. Again, if I don't have any backup singers, so then I started using so, because the structure of ballads, especially the Scandinavian ballads, are very often that there is a refrain that's very important. That's sort of, it usually says something that is not completely related to the story, like in the scary ballad about the drowned girl. It tells that story, but the refrain says, "In the summertime, flowers are spreading far and wide." So you're telling the scary, scary story, and between each verse you say, "Summertime, flowers are spreading out far and wide." So, and that used to be sung by, like I told earlier, like there would be a main singer, and then all the others would join in on that refrain. So I'm trying to maybe create that effect by using this looper and layering voices, and so yeah.
So the same stories, the same tales could be set to different musical settings, and by the same token, could a musical setting then take different lyrics? Was there
Yes, so
improvisational?
you can actually, if you look through those collections of ballads, you can very often see that the same melody is used for for several different ballads. So it was, as I mentioned, I think people improvised a bit, and maybe they knew a couple of melodies, and maybe they mixed it up as was working at the moment when they were performing. So it goes both ways. But then, of course, when you have a story told in like Scotland and then in India, of course, the melodies are going to be different. The names are going to be different, and the landscape they're riding through and all that. So you have to sometimes look for the clues that it is the same story, but a lot of things, of course, including the melody, are going to be a difference.
I'm thinking it must have been interesting to study Bharatanatyam in India, because that also is a kind of a storytelling tradition with
Yes,
ancient traditional roots that was long, like a ballad was. It's very evocative in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I was, that's what drew me to that. At the time, I was looking for ways to learn how to tell stories in different formats, and came across Bharatanatyam. And I was very, very lucky, because I was in France, actually. I was in Paris. I went to a theater school called École Jacques Lecoq. But at the same, yes, and I also found this dance school, if you wish, that where there was a teacher who was teaching Bharatanatyam, and I got very interested in that, because it was also miming stories. I mean, the emphasis is very much on telling stories with hand gestures, and then I was very lucky. I was able to go to India and study with some wonderful teachers there. Savitri Jagannath Rao was my main teacher. I also studied with Kalanidhi Narayanan, who is a mimic teacher. And so I did that for a long time, and sort of to learn how to, what is that? So to learn how to tell stories with dance. And then, and what I learned in that, I find that whether it's theater, dance, singing, music, in one way, to me, it's all the same thing. You're dancing while you're singing right. While you're dancing, while you're doing theater. You sort of so even learning dance actually has been very beneficial for me to singing. I mean, I don't really have any real professional singing training. I have, I've taken classes with some nice, very nice singing coach called Moira Smiley, who has taught me a lot about singing. But I sort of use all these different things to, like the goal is to convey the story, and then any means necessary are used.
That's right. Well, and the Lecoq School is world famous for teaching exactly that tradition, that all of the different expressive forms work together in the service of telling a story.
So I still use that. Yes.
We are about at time. Johanna, I just want to thank you again so deeply for sharing such remarkable music and traditions.
Well, thank you, and I hope the music. I know this is a very strange medium. We were joking about the actual setup here with a spaghetti of very old equipment, cheap things plugged together to get the sound through, and I hope it went through more or less.
It was wonderful. We have elevated the Zoom medium today with this, and it'll never be the same. Thank you again. I hope we can have you on this program again, and I hope we all. I know I will explore your music more deeply. Thanks for sharing the traditions with us and educating us a little bit more about medieval and traditional balladry from many traditions. Thank you all for listening in. That's it for this week's Starting Conversations. We won't be having a program next week, July 1st. We'll take a week off for the holiday week. And please stay in touch with us through our website and our social media channels, and we'll have other guests announced soon. Good evening, Johanna, and to your wonderful technician husband back there behind the technology.
Yes, he's waving too.
He's